And thanks for coming. And I'm Eric Van Rijn. I'm Director of Publishing Operations at the University of California Press. I'm going to be talking to you about a piece of open source software that we've been developing in conjunction with the Collaborative Knowledge Foundation called Ettore, which is open source book production software. And I'd like to say, just to preface this presentation a little bit, you know, a lot of what John was discussing revolved around open source communities that were, you know, relatively mature, but needed to be retooled. I think in a lot of respects, Ettore is really, sort of a nascent initiative, and I think in many respects, kind of an experimental project. Just because there aren't that many open source tools that exist in the space where we are attempting to insert one. So I think that's a, sort of a fundamental shift in the way we do things in publishing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys a little bit of an overview of what the product is, first of all, and then talk a little bit about open source and the impact of thinking about Ettore as an open source project on our thinking about, where it goes from here. So what is it? Like I said, it's a web-based open source book production platform. And it was really inspired by our Luminess open access monograph publishing initiative that we launched about a year and a half ago. For those of you who are familiar with Luminess, it is an OA monograph publishing program. And with Luminess, as with so many other book publishing endeavors, there are a number of costs that are associated with producing monographs. One of the things that we had to really do is try to analyze the P&Ls for these titles and figure out where we might be able to reduce some of the costs that go into monograph publication, because we operate Luminess on a kind of hybrid model where authors contribute to the costs of publication, and we also have a library fund that helps defray some of those costs, and then the press contributes a little bit. So we want to keep the costs of monograph publishing down. We also wanted to move to really a web-first workflow for these titles. We wanted we wanted our authors and we wanted the press as a whole to think of these really as ebooks first, rather than thinking of them as print books first. Of course, print is still very important, and as you can see, they have nicely designed covers, and they do end up becoming print books, but we really wanted to be thinking of these as digital books before we were thinking of them as print books. So getting a workflow that moved entirely to the web was sort of an important, priority for the Luminess project. Then we also wanted to think about, some possibilities that the web opens up for these titles, and I think those are some of the more aspirational things that we're trying to incorporate into Ettore later, but it's something for us to seriously consider. So we also wanted to try to reduce the time to market for these titles. Book production is a big, sloppy, complicated process. Journal articles are, relatively straightforward, I think, in a lot of respects, but books are big and messy, and trying to automate the production of books just isn't easy, as any of you who are involved in book publishing know. So what the solution is really trying to do is to kind of implement a workflow management solution on top that basically starts from the point where an acquisitions editor or their assistant in most cases chucks the manuscript over the fence to the production department, which we call sort of a transmittal process in most publishing houses, and manages that process all the way through publication, which is really the output of final files. And in our case, the steps in that process would be styling and structuring the manuscript, with the coding process. A lot of authors think that 48-point bold really means that it's a first level heading, but it's not, and we all know that, but our authors don't. So that's something that needs to be fixed. And then the copy editing process needs to be handled. And author queries need to be responded to. All these things need to happen during this process. So Ettore fits in this space, this transmittal to output of final file space. And you know, for us, you know, what it becomes at that point is a kind of single source publishing solution. So we want everybody working on one file in one place, and we want the outputs to come from that HTML document. So Ettore stores everything in HTML, and then the outputs are, you know, in our case, PDF, EPUB, and we're also planning to incorporate ICML or InCopy as an output, so that things that need to be more heavily designed can be done in InDesign later on, if that's something that people desire. But the challenge with that, of course, is that, you know, it's not really single source anymore once you take it out and you put it in InDesign. But we really wanted to kind of get rid of this station-to-station oriented workflow that starts in Word and, you know, and finishes in InDesign and eventually turns into a PDF. So what kind of tools do you need for that? Well, any of you who are familiar with book production know that there are a lot of tools that you need for that. You need some kind of a dashboard. Most people are working on more than one book. You need something to represent the kind of narrative structure of a book, which through our kind of user-centered design sessions that Adam facilitated, we settled on was going to become the book builder. Initially, we were thinking about it as a table of contents, but, you know, interestingly, you know, what we learned in that process is that a TOC is kind of an abstraction that people layer onto a book. It's not the way the production people think of a book. We also needed to create kind of robust tools to upload Word files. You know, we want to change the world. We want our authors to be authoring in HTML and web editors, but we know what they're going to do. They're going to be writing their manuscripts in Word, and they're going to be sending them over to us. So we can't make them change the tool that they're going to use at the beginning of the process. We can encourage them to do different things, but we're not going to be able to change that. So we need to be able to do that. So one of the pieces of the pie is to build a Word file uploader. You also need a mechanism to manage figures and illustrations. You know, art is a very important of any good book manuscript, and monographs are no exception. In many cases, you know, art is really critical to them. You need a nice browser-based editor that, you know, replicates a lot of the functionality that people are used to finding in like a Microsoft Word, and you know, can handle comments, queries, tracking of changes, all that kind of stuff. And then tools that will handle the output and the final conversion. So as I mentioned, Ettore is a little bit of an experiment, and those are, you know, some of the tools that it includes, but it's really also a partnership. And at the start of it, it was a partnership between the University of California Press and John's organization, the CDL. And, you know, I think this gets to this point about building communities around open source tools. Library publishers have a lot of needs in this space, because oftentimes they don't have very robust mechanisms for providing book production services to campus units who want to do their own publishing. So the more that they can automate those processes and provide tools to those authors, the more they can attract people into their publishing programs. So it was a critical piece of this that the library and the University Press were publishing on it. We introduced this idea to the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, who decided to help us fund the initial development of the system, and they were big believers in open source technologies, and as a matter of fact, it's a requirement of the output of the project that it be fully open source. And with Coco Foundation, who we've been working with on the development of the system for well over a year and a half now, and have made a tremendous amount of progress in that year and a half. Really, this was kind of a tale of two like-minded organizations and projects. We were interested in building a platform to manage scholarly book production, and Collaborative Knowledge Foundation was interested in building tools to facilitate the building of those platforms. You know, just to pick up on what John said in his presentation, one of the keys here is to make it modular, to not build one big monolithic system and then expect that everybody's going to be able to use it as is out of the box, but to build a really robust layer of components underneath it that can be sort of remixed and matched to the platforms and projects that people want to use them for going forward. These are some of the components of a typical, book production system. You might need others for a journal system, but the idea is to use a component-based architecture so that not everybody is locked into the exact same thing at the end of the process. And PubSuite is sort of the framework that they use to build the components. And I'm not going to tell you all about it right now, but you can also check it out, sort of afterwards. There's a lot of information on it, and Kristen and Adam would be more than happy to talk to you about it later on. So what makes Ettore special? There are a couple things. First of all, it's designed for books from the ground up. We initially took a look at some of the stuff that we were trying to do and realized there are a lot of journal systems that do this. So we could have started with a journal system, and in fact, some of the open source book production systems, that have been in this space in the past have taken ideas from journal systems and tried to translate them into books, and I just don't think it's worked out very well. But we built it, from the user's perspective for books from the ground up. And getting the users involved in this process, I think, was a critical, piece of this also. We had production editors who were working with us, regularly on building the tool as we've been in development. We're hoping that it's going to be easy for people to implement. We've tried to keep the application simple and have tried not to overcomplicate things, and have tried to rely more on configuration than customization in the application. And the idea here is that we are actually targeting a group of publishers who don't have a huge amount of technical resources to implement a tool like this. So you can't make it something that is going to be difficult to implement, or it's just not going to happen. We want to shift the paradigm here to browser-based editing and editorial production, which is not the way that it happens now, for those of you who are familiar with it. We wanted to manage collaboration and teams. I think once you move work onto the web, people think about different ways in which they can work together on the production of a book manuscript, and we really want to bring that out in the application. We really want to encourage a community-based approach to development. I mean, up to now it's been, all Cocoa developers all the time on this project, but I think we want to be able to distribute that and pull more people into the process. That's very important to us. And it's built on open source technologies, which is kind of, an important segue into, it's kind of the second part of this discussion, which is, why do this as an open source project? What's important about that to us and to you all potentially, who are potential consumers or users of the system? So it was interesting preparing this presentation for this panel, because it forced me to think about it again. And rather than just saying, well, the funder wanted us to do it as an open source project, I had to really think about why we're doing it this way. And I think there are a number of good reasons to do publishing infrastructure as open source software. And Kristen alluded to one of them earlier in her discussion, which is, do you really need to build, conversion software for the 10th time? I mean, is that really what everybody wants to differentiate their software on? I think there's a kind of service layer where people can, differentiate their offering rather than differentiating themselves on the technology. And that's a little bit of a paradigm shift, but I think we're ready to start thinking about it. But, for smaller publishers, we also wanted to decrease the barriers to entry. This was kind of an important thing. We wanted to make sure that people could adopt it easily, to download it, to play with it without having to get an hour-long sales pitch or to invest, a certain amount of time, resources, and potentially money in installing it, working with it, and then having it not work for them. We wanted to incentivize a developer community to grow around this. That is a nascent part of this initiative at this point, but I'm hoping that it will grow. We wanted publishers to really be able to distribute the cost of building infrastructure. In the beginning of my talk, I said, a lot of this was inspired by open access book publishing. That really only succeeds if we can keep the costs low. And keeping the cost of, production and the software low is an important piece of that. We'd really like to develop a network of service providers around this who are differentiating themselves again on the service offering around the software rather than, some tweaks to the software itself. We want to incentivize the incorporation of standards. Standards become a little bit of a lingua franca for developers to work with, and I think open source projects facilitate the incorporation of standards a lot better than proprietary projects do. I think ultimately open source projects, result in better experiences for users because they are able to contribute their thoughts and needs and requirements more easily and readily into the development of the software. So those are some of the goals for open source. For this project. But I think one of the things that's key in a project like this to remember is that, being idealistic about building good open source software is not enough. You have to really build the best product. And this is just a quote from the WordPress founder that I thought I would put up here. Because WordPress has really had to do that. They've had to say, we're going to be the best free open source blogging platform out there, and that's how we're going to attract users to the software. It's not enough for it to just be open source. So I think, even if you want to build good open source software, it can't just be good open source software. It has to be great open source software. And that, gets to, some of the challenges with open source in a publishing environment is that, publishers, and this is really where the rubber hits the road, right? Publishers are used to buying products. They're not used to developing products. And that's the way that most of us have operated our businesses. And I've bought many good products in my course of managing technology services for a publisher over the last, decade. I've also bought a lot of really bad products and implemented them and had people, ready to chase me out of the office. So one of the things that I think we need to think about when we're getting into this space, again, is building great products, but also realizing that there's a certain culture that you have to work within that's used to having products implemented that you buy. There can be challenges with integrating those products with existing tools that you have in your workflow. Configuration and professional services require, resources that you can have access to. Not all publishers are going to have, a stable of developers who are ready to work on the tool and make changes to it when necessary. I think unlike libraries where there's a strong tradition of collaborating on open source projects to deliver library automation solutions, in publishing that just hasn't happened yet. So again, in many ways, Ettore I think is a little bit of an experimental project, and we're hoping that we can overcome some of those obstacles through building really robust communities around the software. But I also wanted to highlight that this far up the stack, there are a lot of really successful open source projects, and this is just a handful of them. A lot of these organizations have built really fantastic, in many cases, very complex pieces of software for managing web publishing, e-commerce, even functions as diverse as CRM and other things. LibreOffice isn't on here, but that's a fantastic piece of desktop software. And next time I'll use it for a presentation, but because I'm tired of PowerPoint. But I think it's. But I think there are a lot of, all of these have become successful in different ways. Okay. WordPress has Automatic, which is sort of the parent organization behind WordPress.com, which generates a lot of income, which they pour back into WordPress.org, and they just use it to, make the software better. Drupal has a much different sort of nonprofit structure in place around it. Alfresco has more of a service provider model. They provide a community edition and then provide, a higher suite of enterprise services that they provide along with Alfresco. But a lot of these are integrated into enterprise environments now, and people use them every day. So I think there's a sweet spot of book publishers who are potentially interested in this. I won't say that it's limited to this group, but I think UC Press and CDL kind of are examples of the university press and library publisher model who would be interested. But I think there are also a lot of other unaffiliated nonprofit book publishers out there who can use this software. In many cases, are willing to contribute development resources to the software that university presses and library publishers may not be able to contribute. So I think there's a whole ecosystem of book publishers who may adopt the software given the opportunity. When it's freely available and can be downloaded, which it actually is right now. So just to kind of wrap up, I think there are a lot of benefits to publishers considering implementing open source tools in their workflows. I think you really you have less vendor lock-in. That's the obvious one, right? A lot of us have been in that space where it's been 3 years. It's time to do the RFP. There's a huge expensive migration. Nobody really wants to have to do that all the time, and it happens every once in a while, unfortunately. And the way that you can beat that is through openness and using open standards. It makes a kind of situation where you're locked into that a lot less likely to happen. You can give people the opportunity to sort of play with software before they have to buy it and go, feet first into a huge commitment to implement it and, a year-long change management project. You also introduce the opportunity for people to contribute to a project that, in other cases they wouldn't be able to contribute to. A lot of the commercial software that's out there, while they do have, user group meetings and community meetings, a lot of the feature set is driven by what will actually, make the software vendor money, and sometimes that's not in alignment with what an organization wants to get out of software development and out of feature implementation. I think there's possibly a chance for us to better distribute the costs of developing publishing infrastructure amongst each other, and that can be a critical component. And also creating a level of interoperability and customizability that just doesn't exist right now. So I mentioned the source code is available. Here's the location where the repos can be downloaded if you want to do that. Later this summer, right now we're kind of unit testing certain pieces of the editor and things like that. But later this summer, once we have some things stabilized, I'd like to get a demo version up for people to just be able to log into and use. And if you want to get in touch with me, I can let you know when that's going to happen. On our website, I'll do a blog posting and let people know when that's available. But just give people the ability to kick the tires online, which I think is going to be an important thing for people to be able to do. If you want to get in touch with me, this is the way to do it. And that's it. Thanks, everybody.